In June 1969, a 6-year-old boy named Dennis Martin vanished while on a family trip to the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. This wasn't just any disappearance, it caught the attention of the FBI and even the US Army Special Forces. Some witnesses and uncovered files suggested something horrifying. Dennis might have been taken and eaten by someone living deep in the mountains. Now, fast forward 39 years. Same mountains, another disappearance, but this one even stranger. The secrets of the Smoky Mountains, buried for nearly 4 decades, finally started to surface. On the morning of August 23, 2008, a warm summer day, 51-year-old farmer Mike Seven from Blount County, Tennessee, kissed his sleeping family goodbye. He was heading to his farm, just as he did every day. Mike was born on June 15, 1957, and he owned a 110-acre farm near the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. On weekends, after tending to his animals, he'd take his ATV into the forest, often hunting in the dense woods. Around 11 a.m., Mike rode his ATV into the trees, but he never came back. Now here's the thing, Mike wasn't just any guy. He was an experienced outdoorsman, a hunter, someone who knew these woods like the back of his hand. He had 2 sons, Matt, 25, and Andy, 26. Andy remembered getting a call from his dad that morning. Around 9:30, Mike said he was heading to the farm to mow. Neither of them thought much about it. This was just normal for their dad. But the first person to realize something was off was Mike's mum. The next morning, August 24th, she called her grandsons. She told them she still hadn't heard from Mike. That's when things clicked. The brothers quickly drove out to the farm to check on him. What they found, strange. At the farm, they saw 4 vehicles. A Mercedes and a Harley were in the garage. Mike's truck parked on the roadside, with a trailer and mower still attached, but his ATV gone. The truck's windows were rolled up, but the doors were unlocked. Inside, Mike's keys, wallet, phone, even his ID, everything, except for Mike himself. What could have happened to a skilled hunter in a place he knew so well? On August 25th, Mike's 2 sons informed their relatives about his disappearance and called their mother, Emily. Although Emily had been divorced from Mike for nearly 7 years, she immediately joined the search efforts. The group searched the entire farm, nearby areas, and even checked campsites at the base of the mountain. But they found nothing. At 4 p.m., Matt decided to call 911. Initially, they spoke with the National Park Service, but since the farm was outside the park's jurisdiction, the case was handed over to the Blount County Sheriff's Office. By 6 or 7 p.m., Sheriff Bryan and a search and rescue team arrived at the scene. Mike's neighbor, Grady Whiten, 80-year-old retired park ranger from the Great Smoky Mountains, organized his own search team. Despite his age, Grady was determined. Mike had been his closest friend. Grady had worked in the park from 1955 to 1988 and knew its secrets better than anyone. This time, he brought a high-caliber rifle and hunting dogs. Why? Because, in his mind, the Smoky Mountains were home to something dangerous. On the second day of the search, a volunteer discovered Mike's ATV. It was parked on a steep hillside along a remote trail one rarely traveled by anyone. The vehicle wasn't damaged. The keys were still in the ignition, and it was set in high gear. On August 27th, law enforcement gathered over 50 volunteers to conduct a grid search near the ATV. They combed through about 451 acres, double-checking certain areas, but there were no signs of Mike, no footprints, no torn clothing, no blood, nothing. It was as if Mike had vanished into thin air. On August 29th, the Blount County Sheriff's Office officially suspended the search. Mike's disappearance was ultimately classified as an unknown supernatural event. In January 2009, investigators revisited the area where Mike's ATV was found. This time, they discovered a piece of clothing and some bones in a but forensic analysis confirmed they didn't belong to Mike. Years later, in 2012, a hiker stumbled across something eerie in a remote area of the park called Tremont. Hanging from a tree branch was a shoe, and inside the shoe was a mummified foot. When authorities arrived, Sheriff Bryan immediately identified it as belonging to Mike Severin. It was his left foot, but beyond the shoe, there were no other traces of Mike, and so his story remains unsolved, buried within the mysteries of the Smoky Mountains. The location where Mike's shoe was found was nearly 26 miles from where his ATV had been discovered. If he had walked there, it would have taken at least 10 hours of continuous hiking without rest or food. Tremont lies deep within the Great Smoky Mountains National Park at an elevation of 6,000 feet. Climbing to such a height alone is no easy feat. The canyon's extreme temperature shifts between day and night make survival even more challenging. Mike had no reason to head uphill. If he had gotten lost, he could have easily followed a stream downhill to find help. Streams in this area are abundant and easy to locate. Moreover, Mike grew up here. He was an experienced hunter who knew the terrain well and could have found his way back without difficulty. Possible explanations: 1. Suicide or murder. These theories were quickly ruled out. Mike loved his family deeply, despite divorcing his ex-wife Emily years earlier. They remained on good terms, and Emily had even joined the search effort for him. Mike also looked forward to his sons getting married and starting families of their own. He ran a successful construction company with no financial troubles or enemies. 2. Getting lost or a vehicle accident. This theory was also dismissed. When Mike's ATV was found, it was still running, without any scratches or signs of collision. This indicated that Mike had voluntarily left the vehicle. If he had sensed danger, like a bear, there would have been signs of a struggle, footprints, claw marks, or blood. But nothing of the sort was found. Grady's chilling theory. As the investigation stalled, retired park ranger Grady White offered a shocking explanation. He believed Mike might have been abducted by a wild man living in the mountains. Grady, who had worked in the Smokies for 33 years, recounted a strange experience from his youth. While patrolling the mountains, I heard heavy footsteps following me. Each time I stopped and turned around, the footsteps stopped too. But as soon as I moved again, the sound returned. I tried speeding up to lose whatever it was, but the footsteps grew faster as well. I'm certain it wasn't human. The steps were too heavy and far too large. Grady began carrying a rifle on every patrol after that. I believe something unknown lives in this park. At night, we'd hear horrifying howls that didn't belong to any animal or bear. Grady's claim wasn't unique. In the case of Dennis Martin, a 6-year-old boy who vanished in the Smokies in 1969, another park ranger, Dwight McCarter, suggested that wild men could be responsible. Dwight claimed these wild men had lived in the mountains for generations. According to him, the government was aware of their existence, but chose to keep the truth hidden from the public.
Wild man that you knew of that for sure lived in the Smoky Mountains or in this area? Or could there have been other people back up in there?
Well, that And I told Arthur and JR, I says, I smell something dead off in on West Prong. We were talking about the Martin boy
Yeah.
on the. He's sort of a wild man, according to the family that in Carthage, Tennessee, you know.
So, at this point, Mike's family was honestly just creeped out. Andy, well, he remembered his dad saying that weird stuff always happened around the farm, like animals just disappearing, no explanation, and at night, there were these strange knocking sounds. Then, when the ranger started talking about Bigfoot, yeah, you can imagine. That image of a wild, human-like creature flashed through everyone's mind. Maybe, just maybe, Mike's disappearance was connected to that. But the Blount County Sheriff's Office, they still thought this was just an unexplainable supernatural event. Now, here's the thing, Mike's case wasn't the first strange disappearance around here. Before Mike went missing, there was another weird case. But since the person came back safe after 2 days, it didn't really get much attention. Back in 2006, there was this 60-year-old guy named Paul. He lived at the base of the Great Smoky Mountains in this area called Pigeon Valley. It was about 30 miles from Mike's farm. So, on October 5th, 2006, Paul's family came to the Blount County Sheriff's Office, freaking out. Paul had gone into the mountains to hunt and he just didn't come back. But 2 days later, Paul walked out of the woods, alone. Now, Paul wasn't hurt or anything, but his mental state, oh, it was bad. Like, he looked terrified. When they asked him what happened, Paul's story, it was chilling. He said, I was out hunting, and suddenly I saw this orange, glowing orb. It was like hovering in the air about 50 meters away, and then it started moving toward me, slowly. Next thing I know, there's this blinding white light, and I black out. When Paul woke up, he was in some kind of, I don't know, cave, a nest. The place was filled with bones. He said he couldn't tell if they were animal bones or human. Paul was terrified. He curled up in a corner and stayed there for who knows how long. Then he heard these heavy footsteps. Something big was coming closer, and that's when he saw it. This giant, hairy creature. Paul said it had to be at least 8 feet tall, maybe 300 pounds. The thing was covered in hair, and it smelled like death. It was holding berries. Yeah, berries, but Paul was too scared to even look at it. He said he must have passed out again, just from pure fear. When he came to, he was on a path leading down the mountain. He followed it, and somehow made it home. Now, here's the kicker: Paul's hunting rifle, his phone, his keys, all gone. And when he told the cops about this creature, they immediately put him through a lie detector test. But here's the thing: when they tested Paul with the lie detector, the results showed he wasn't lying. Everything he said seemed to be true. The weird part, when Paul led rangers back to the spot where he said the creature's nest was, they couldn't find it. No matter how hard they looked, Paul kept insisting that he saw an orange glowing orb before ending up in the creature's nest. Now, if that glowing orb was a UFO, then, technically, Paul's encounter should have been with aliens, right? So why was it Bigfoot? From what I've researched, there's actually a pattern. In areas where people frequently report Bigfoot sightings, there also seems to be a higher frequency of UFO sightings. One well-known Bigfoot researcher, Bill Brock, has this theory. He thinks these orange glowing orbs might act as some kind of magnetic portals for Bigfoot, allowing them to travel between different places. And maybe that's why people never find Bigfoot's body. There was even an article back on October 19th, 2015, suggesting that Bigfoot could be closely linked to extraterrestrials or other supernatural beings. But not everyone buys into that idea. Some believe Bigfoot is just a species that evolved parallel to humans, kind of distant cousin. The theory is that a long time ago, our ancestors drove them deep into the forests, where they've been living in isolation ever since. As for the UFOs, those could just be coincidences, with no connection to Bigfoot at all. Both Bigfoot and UFOs are shrouded in mystery, but any real link between them still needs solid proof. Now, about these two cases, both Mike and Paul were hunters and farmers. So, is it possible Bigfoot specifically targets hunters? Hard to say. Bigfoot's behavior has always been complicated. On one hand, people describe it as cunning, even violent, snatching kids, luring hikers off their trails. But on the other hand, there are stories where Bigfoot shows kindness, helping lost hikers find their way back, even sharing food. Compared to Mike, Paul was definitely lucky. The creature didn't kill him, but we can't assume the next person will get the same luck. Paul's description of the nest, with all those bones, it's pretty clear the creature's eaten a lot of animals, and maybe even humans. Mike and Paul's experiences leave us with way more questions than answers. These days, Mike's sons, Matt and Andy, organize an annual hike called Hike for Mike to honor their dad. They're still actively searching for him. The Great Smoky Mountains National Park, which stretches across Tennessee and North Carolina, is the most visited national park in the US. Its dense, mist-covered forests have always drawn visitors in with their unique, mysterious vibe. But over the years, the park's also been the site of numerous strange, unsolved disappearances. And somewhere, hidden in that foggy wilderness, are still untold stories waiting to be discovered.
There's a stretch of trail winding through the Great Smoky Mountains that seems, at first glance, no different from 100 others. Thick trees lean over the path like guardians. The air is heavy with the scent of pine and loam. Moss clings to rocks like skin, and the light plays tricks through the canopy. But on a morning in September 1991, something happened there that even time hasn't been able to explain away. Adam Mason was a 32-year-old civil engineer from Chicago. Clean-cut, rational, the kind of man who planned vacations with spreadsheets and carried a backup compass just in case. He and his wife, Linda, were on their third trip to the Smokies, Gatlinburg, Tennessee, to be exact, drawn back again by the trails, the solitude, the raw beauty of the park. They chose the Alum Cave Trail, a popular 8-kilometer path that snakes up toward Mount LeConte. That morning, September 11th, the weather was ideal. Cool, a touch of fog, the kind that lingers low like breath across the forest floor. By 8 a.m., they had parked, packed light, and started walking. Adam had brought along his favorite binoculars. He loved geology, would stop to marvel at exposed rock layers or snap photos of mineral formations most people passed without noticing. Linda described him as grounded, not the kind of man who would wander off for no reason. They reached a section near the Eye of the Needle, about 5.5 kilometers in. There, Linda sat on a flat rock to eat. Adam spotted a rocky outcrop just off the path and said he wanted a closer look. "I'll be back in a minute," he told her. And then, he vanished. Not in some melodramatic way. There were no screams, no strange lights, just time passing. 5 minutes. 10. Linda started calling his name. No answer. She assumed he'd maybe kept walking up the trail, so she followed it for a bit. But when she reached the next viewpoint and still didn't see him, she doubled back. That's when it hit her. Adam was gone. His binoculars had been neatly placed atop his pack near the rock. That unsettled her. He never set them down. She sprinted back down the trail to the parking area and alerted the ranger station. What followed was 6 full days of organized search. Rangers, volunteers, dogs, over 50 people at one point combing the slopes of Mount LeConte. The forest was dense, yes, but not impenetrable. The spot where Adam disappeared was bordered by steep rock and heavy brush, but it wasn't the kind of place someone could disappear forever without leaving a trace. But that's just what happened. There were no footprints, no broken twigs, no signs of a fall. The dogs picked up a faint trail, but it dissolved near a pile of loose rock that had collapsed long ago. Some thought he might have slipped into a hidden crevice, but with no gear, no sound, and no signs. That theory never quite held. And then on the morning of September 17th, 6 days after Adam Mason disappeared, he walked out of the forest. Just like that, 9 a.m. The same trail, same direction, same stretch of path. A man in a dark jacket and hiking pants stepped out from the tree line like someone finishing a morning walk. Witnesses later said he looked pale, confused, not starved, not dehydrated, just lost in a way that didn't make sense. Linda was called. The ranger team took him to a cabin for questioning. His clothes were intact, dry. His pack still had food and water. No scratches, no bruises, no sunburn, no signs of exposure. Adam couldn't explain where he had been. He said he'd only stepped away for a few minutes to examine a boulder, then returned to find Linda gone. He assumed she'd kept moving forward, so he followed the trail. But the path changed. In his words, the route stopped making sense. The curves were wrong. Trees seemed out of place. He started feeling dizzy, like the trail was shifting under him. Then came the fog. Not the misty kind that rises naturally. He described it like a curtain falling. And when it lifted, it was as if night had descended instantly. He stopped walking, tried to orient himself, but there was no hunger, no thirst, no bird song, only silence, and the sound of faint footsteps behind him, though he never saw anyone when he turned around. He repeated the same words to rangers again and again. "I was here the whole time, but not here." His medical tests came back clean. Blood pressure, hydration, mental state, all within normal range. A psychiatrist noted temporary confusion and amnesia, but no signs of psychosis or trauma. After 2 days of rest, Adam recovered, but he refused to talk further. Not to the rangers, not to reporters, not even to Linda. All he ever said to her in a whisper one night was, "I think I was here the whole time, just in another place." What kind of place, though? From a survival standpoint, it didn't make sense. A man can't go 6 days in the woods, not use his gear, and emerge perfectly healthy. No marks, no bug bites, no sun exposure. The Park Service, baffled, filed the case under inexplicable disappearance and recovery. No evidence of crime, no trace of mental illness, no signs of deception. But the questions kept piling up. The search teams had swept every meter of the zone where Adam reappeared. Dozens of professionals had passed through that same stretch every single day. If he'd been there all along, someone would have seen him, but no one did. The case was eventually referred to the Incident Analysis Division. Geologic anomalies were investigated: sinkholes, lava tubes, natural pits. Nothing fit. No sign of movement, no disturbance of moss, no shifts in animal patterns. It was as if the woods had never been touched. 3 days after his return, small headlines ran in local papers. Man reappears in Smokies after 6 days missing. But Adam Mason offered no interviews. His wife made it clear they were leaving Tennessee. They had no intention of reliving it. One park ranger, Richard Hopkins, later admitted something that still haunts him. "We searched everywhere, places no human could go without leaving a trace, and there was nothing. No snapped branches, no displaced stones, no sign anyone had ever stepped foot there. And the one thing that stayed in everyone's mind? The binoculars, sitting atop that pack, untouched, waiting. What do you do with a case that refuses to fit inside the lines of logic? When Adam Mason reappeared on that mist-covered trail, it should have been the end of the story. But in truth, it was only the beginning. Because the moment he walked out of the forest, clean and quiet and blank-eyed, something shifted, something subtle but permanent. He returned, yes, but he didn't come back the same. The investigation that followed was exhaustive. The Federal Park Service escalated the case to their Wilderness Incident Analysis Unit, a group trained not just in traditional search and rescue, but in rare and unusual disappearances that defied terrain and explanation. The Mason file was thick with inconsistencies. They looked at topographical data, trail schematics, geological risk zones. They even explored rare environmental anomalies, karst collapses, volcanic tubes, and phantom terrain shifts, all known to exist in certain parts of the Appalachians. But nothing matched. The site where Adam vanished had no reported hazards, no crevices, no unstable formations, no magnetic anomalies that could confuse a compass. At least, none that had ever been charted. And then there was the strangest detail of all, his gear. When Linda had returned to the rock where she last saw him, she'd found Adam's backpack and binoculars resting neatly beside one another, as if someone had set them down with intention. His food remained sealed, water untouched, not a single wrapper torn. That gear stayed right there for the entire 6 days. No one had touched it, including Adam. Searchers had walked past it countless times. It was as though he'd vanished, not just physically, but completely, leaving behind no scent, no heat, not even the ripple of movement. By January of 1992, the Park Service quietly closed the case. In their official summary, they wrote that the disappearance and reappearance of Mr. Mason remain unexplained, with no evidence of crime, no indication of faked disappearance, and no signs of accidental injury. But privately, not everyone was satisfied. In one internal report, never released to the public, an investigator wrote something that still circulates today in forums and podcasts dedicated to wilderness mysteries. If this man truly spent 6 days in that forest without leaving any trace, without showing any signs of exposure or stress, then we have to reconsider what we know about the human body, or admit that he wasn't in our environment at all. That's when Michael Bird entered the picture. A retired investigator from Kentucky, Bird had spent years tracking odd disappearances across national parks, cases that shared a specific signature, missing time, perfect physical condition upon return, and a strange fog of memory loss that never seemed to lift. He took an interest in Adam Mason and spent nearly 2 years digging into his background. What he found wasn't just odd, it was quietly disturbing. In the months following the incident, Adam changed. He left his job as a civil engineer, just resigned without much explanation, sold his condo in Chicago, packed up his life with Linda, and moved across the country to a small, remote town in Oregon. Cut ties with most friends, changed phone numbers, disappeared in a different way this time, by choice. One former coworker told Bird that Adam had become distant and irritable. And there was something else. He'd started reading obsessively about theoretical physics, specifically quantum entanglement, dimensional theory, and time-space distortion. Subjects he had never been interested in before. The change didn't seem like curiosity. It felt like necessity, like he was searching for a language to describe something he had no words for. And there was that one cryptic sentence, something he said only once, according to Linda. "I think I was here the whole time, but in another place." Bird tried to reach out to Adam directly, but was politely turned away. Still, he persisted, tracked down field notes, ranger testimony, and even satellite data from the days Mason was missing. What he found raised even more questions. On the third night of the search, rangers reported a dense fog forming in the valley below Mount LeConte. The temperature dropped rapidly, more than forecasted. Birds stopped singing. One rescue dog refused to move past a certain point, whimpering and circling as if blocked by something unseen. A volunteer, who asked not to be named, later described a sound. Low, distant like the grinding of stone deep underground, that vibrated through the trees for several minutes, then stopped completely. He assumed it was a minor landslide. But there had been no seismic activity that night, Nothing at all. And years later, in a stack of reports gathered by Bird, he uncovered accounts that stretched beyond Adam Mason. Tourists from the 1980s and early 90s had described the same section of the Alum Cave Trail, near the Eye of the Needle, as unnerving. Several reported a sudden loss of direction, like the forest had turned in on itself. Compasses spinning, ears ringing. One woman claimed her legs went numb, like she had stepped through some invisible wall of pressure. They left the trail that night and never returned. None of these accounts were ever officially acknowledged. They were chalked up to fatigue, elevation, or simple disorientation. But in light of Mason's experience, they seemed less like exaggerations and more like warning signs. And then there's the matter of the steps. Adam told rangers he heard them multiple times during his missing days. Quiet footsteps always behind him. Never seen, never loud. Just enough to suggest he wasn't alone. But every time he turned to look, nothing. Some listeners might say this points toward stress-induced hallucination. Others might argue it's a natural symptom of isolation. But the problem is, he didn't appear isolated. His body didn't behave like someone who'd spent 6 days in the wilderness without shelter. He had no sunburn, no cold injuries, no infections. His water supply, untouched. His food, still sealed. Even his fingernails were clean. No dirt, no blood, no broken skin. That left only one option, one that no one wanted to say aloud. He hadn't been in the woods, not our woods at least. It was as if something else, something unnameable, had stepped between him and the rest of the world. And for 6 days, it held him there, somewhere nearby, and yet completely beyond reach. After moving to Oregon, Adam and Linda withdrew entirely from public view. They never spoke publicly about what happened. Their address eventually became unlisted. And when Bird drove through their small town 3 years later, neighbors only remembered them vaguely, quiet, kept to themselves, rarely seen. And then they were gone. A house left empty, no forwarding address. Some believe Adam went off-grid by choice to protect his mind from breaking. Others believe he was still being watched, that he knew more than he let on, and feared what would happen if he shared it. Because when you come back from somewhere that doesn't exist on any map, the silence you carry with you might be the only thing keeping it from finding you again. Some stories fade with time. This one doesn't. The deeper you look into the case of Adam Mason, the less it behaves like a wilderness rescue and the more it echoes something older, something mythic, like a modern-day tale of a man stepping through a door he didn't know existed and somehow walking back out. In the months that followed his disappearance and reappearance, whispers started to collect in online forums, among amateur researchers, and within circles of those who track unsolved wilderness vanishings. Adam's name became another entry in a growing list, cases that couldn't be explained with trails, maps, or weather patterns. But it wasn't just his case that stood out. It was how it all happened, or more precisely, how little happened in a place where so much should have. When you lose someone in the wilderness, especially someone with no shelter, no food, no fire, you find evidence, bones, torn clothes, disturbed soil, at the very least a body that shows time has passed. But Adam's body betrayed no time at all. One ranger, under the condition of anonymity, admitted something chilling. He said, "We searched that section of the trail every day. We passed that exact spot. There was no one there, no movement, not even birdsong, just stillness, like the forest was holding its breath." Others felt it too, that low gut-level unease, the feeling that the woods were watching. After the case was closed, some began connecting Adam's story to a cluster of reports that had emerged from the Smokies across the 1980s and early 90s. People had reported strange feelings of vertigo and sudden disorientation in a small radius near Mount LeConte. One even claimed time had slowed down, as if hours had passed while their watch only showed 10 minutes. In 1987, a Knoxville resident named Henry West told park rangers that his compass spun erratically while hiking near the Eye of the Needle. He and his wife became so disoriented that they camped in place until sunrise, despite being less than a mile from the main trail. His wife later described a humming in her ears and a feeling of numbness in her legs, like something unseen had pressed against her body. None of this was made public. It stayed buried in field notes and old radio logs, but it was all there, threaded like static beneath the clean narrative of a national park. Then there's the matter of the private files. During Bird's investigation, he uncovered a page, handwritten by a junior analyst in the Wilderness Incident Unit. It was never submitted in the final report, just a personal memo, almost a journal entry. It read, "If Mason really was in that area for 6 days without needing food, water, or rest, then it wasn't our forest keeping him alive. It was something else. And if the forest can let someone in like that, what's to say it can't keep others from coming back?" That memo was never signed. This idea of people stepping outside our reality without ever intending to has existed for centuries. Cultures across the world describe places where the land folds in on itself, where time runs unevenly, where you can walk forward and somehow never arrive. Call them what you will, thin places, geomagnetic windows, zones of silence. The name doesn't matter. What matters is what they do. They take, sometimes for good, sometimes for days, sometimes forever. There are those who believe the mountains are alive in ways science hasn't yet found language for. Not alive like a heartbeat, but alive like memory. That forests can remember paths not marked on maps, or recall travelers who've walked them before, even if those travelers never came back. And maybe, just maybe, Adam Mason brushed against one of those memories. What makes his case especially disturbing is what happened after he returned, because instead of fading back into normal life, he quietly erased it. He abandoned his profession, cut ties, sold everything, and moved to a town where no one knew his name. According to one former neighbor in Oregon, Adam and Linda lived simply. No social life, no children. The man described Adam as polite, but hollow. Like a radio tuned to the wrong frequency, he said. He was there, but not all the way there. And that hollow space, the part that never seemed to come back, was the part no one could reach. Even his wife seemed changed. Linda stopped answering letters from extended family. They declined invitations, never visited home. Eventually, they became whispers to those who once knew them. And then they were gone. The house was sold, no forwarding address, no trace of where they moved next. Years later, in a dusty archive of Bird's personal research, someone found a note. It was never confirmed to be Adam's, no signature. Just a folded piece of paper tucked inside a copy of a physics journal on quantum dimensions. The note read, "Time does not move in a line. Sometimes we step into folds and they step into us. I wasn't supposed to see it, but now I do." Whether it was his or not, it felt like him. So where does that leave us? With questions. Could it have been a medical event? Fugue state dissociation, trauma-induced psychosis? Maybe. But none of those explain the total lack of exposure, the absence of dehydration, the pristine condition of his body and gear. Could it have been staged? That theory evaporates under scrutiny. Adam's finances, identity, and relationships were intact. He didn't gain anything from the experience, only loss. Which leaves us with the uncomfortable possibility that what happened to Adam Mason was real. And not just real, but part of something bigger. The Great Smoky Mountains hold more than just beauty and biodiversity. They hold silence. Deep, abiding silence that isn't empty, but waiting. For what, we don't know. Maybe to be noticed. Maybe to be understood. And maybe to remind us that we don't know these places as well as we think. What Adam said that one night, just once, was probably the closest he ever came to telling the truth. I think I was here the whole time, but in another place. A place that doesn't exist on maps. A place where time dissolves and footsteps echo without owners. A place you can stumble into, without ever realizing you've left the world behind. And if that place exists in the woods of Tennessee near Mount LeConte, then who's to say how many others have stepped through and never made it back? That's the haunting question Adam Mason left behind, and it's the one no search team can ever answer. Because what do you do when someone vanishes into thin air and comes back carrying a silence you can still feel? You don't file it. You don't solve it. You just listen to the forest, and you pray you never hear it whisper your name. If stories like this resonate with you, if the unexplained makes you pause, makes you wonder what else is out there, consider sharing this story subscribing for more, and exploring the deeper truths that lie beyond the edge of the known world. Stay safe out there. And remember, some trails don't lead where you think they do. What if someone vanished deep in the wilderness? No struggle, no cries for help, just eerie clues left behind like a backpack, perfectly placed on a tree branch, and boots standing upright on a cliff's edge. That's exactly what happened in the summer of 2002, when a seasoned forest ranger disappeared inside one of America's most mysterious national parks. And what searchers found in the days that followed? It still haunts everyone who was there. Jacob Smith wasn't your average park ranger. At 26 years old, he'd spent 5 years working for the Great Smoky Mountains National Park in Tennessee. But Jacob's connection to the land ran deeper than a job. He'd grown up there. The trees, the trails, the sounds of the forest, they were part of him. Locals said he could hike blindfolded and still know where he was. On August 14, 2002, Jacob checked out of the ranger station for a routine 2-day patrol. He was assigned to a stretch of the park known as Dark Valley, a name that locals said didn't just come from the thick tree canopy. This was one of the park's most remote and inaccessible areas. Steep cliffs, tight ravines, and dense, unforgiving woods. Tourists rarely ventured there. Rangers only went in pairs. But Jacob had patrolled it before. He wasn't worried. He carried the usual gear: a map, compass, two-way radio, water, food. He logged his route. Everything was by the book. The next day, August 15th, he radioed a brief check-in to a fellow ranger. His tone was calm. He said he was right on schedule. That was the last time anyone ever heard from him. When Jacob didn't return, no one assumed he was slacking off. He was known for being reliable to a fault. By the morning of August 16th, a full-scale search and rescue operation was underway. Dozens of rangers, canine units, and helicopters swept the Dark Valley. The terrain was brutal, but Jacob knew it well. The team expected to find him quickly, but days passed. No trace. Then, on the 4th day, something finally turned up, and it sent chills down everyone's spine. 16 kilometers from his last known location, at the edge of a dense forest, searchers found Jacob's backpack. But it hadn't been dropped or lost. It was neatly hung on the branch of a tree, almost ceremoniously. Inside was untouched food, a map, a compass, full water bottles. It was as if someone placed it there, knowing exactly what they were doing. Even stranger, a few kilometers deeper, they found his ranger jacket. It had been shredded, not by branches or animals, but by something sharp. The cuts were deep, uniform, and symmetrical. It looked deliberate. Around the jacket were strange footprints, bigger than normal, spaced unnaturally wide. And then, nothing. The tracks just stopped, as if the person, or thing, that left them had vanished into thin air. But that wasn't the worst of it. The following morning, the rescue team discovered the partial remains of a human skull deep inside a narrow cave. It was resting on a flat stone, surrounded by small animal bones, arranged in a circular pattern, almost like a ritualistic display. DNA testing later confirmed what everyone feared. It was Jacob. Yet nothing about the scene made sense. No signs of a fall, no signs of animal activity. Just that eerie placement, that intentional feel, and a growing sense that whatever happened to Jacob, it wasn't natural. They say the forest remembers. And in the days following Jacob Smith's disappearance, the Great Smoky Mountains began whispering secrets no one could explain. 3 days after the discovery of Jacob's eerie backpack, hanging like a forgotten warning sign on a branch, the search teams pushed deeper into the forest. But something had shifted. Even the most seasoned rangers, people who'd spent decades navigating the Smokies, began reporting strange sensations. Radios cut out for no reason. Compass needles spun uncontrollably. And more than once, searchers claimed to hear distant footsteps echoing behind them, always just out of sight. Then came the jacket, torn straight down both sides like it had been slashed by something sharp, maybe even calculated. No blood, no signs of a fall, Just that heavy silence and a growing dread. The strangest detail? The way the footprints around the jacket simply ended. Not faded, not disturbed. Ended. As if whoever left them had vanished into thin air, or worse, had been lifted out of the world altogether. As the team pressed on, they stumbled across a cave entrance partially hidden beneath layers of moss and roots. Inside, the air grew instantly cold, like something inside had never felt sunlight. At the very back, on a stone platform, was the partial skull of a man. DNA would later confirm it belonged to Jacob Smith. But it was what surrounded the skull that shook everyone. Bones of small animals placed carefully in a circle. A crude altar, a symbol of something old, something wrong. Theories began to fly. Everything from occult rituals to drug traffickers using the forest as a cover, but none explained the next discovery. Perched high on a rock ledge, overlooking a gorge so deep it swallowed the light, were Jacob's boots. Upright, untouched by dirt or debris, as if someone had placed them there with purpose. Around them, the ground bore carvings, deep scratch marks that formed symbols no one recognized. Not initials, not names. Something ancient. Something territorial. Specialists were called in. One anthropologist, after examining the markings, whispered a theory no one wanted to repeat. She said the symbols looked protective, as if warning outsiders to stay away. As if something in that forest didn't just live there. It claimed the land. But things got even more unsettling. Beside the boots were strands of hair, not Jacob's, human but unidentifiable. How did they get there? Who, or what, left them? Suddenly, a story long dismissed as local superstition started creeping back into the conversation. Rangers spoke in hushed tones about uncharted parts of the Smokies where GPS stops working, animals refuse to enter, and thick fog rolls in without a forecast. Tales passed down for generations about a presence, not quite man, not quite beast, that stalked the forest with silent steps and watched from the trees. Still, the search pressed on, though fewer volunteered to continue. And then came the last clue, a handful of severed fingers laid out along the banks of a narrow river. Jacob's DNA, clean cuts, arranged deliberately, as if someone, or something, was leaving a message. By then, most of the team didn't want answers anymore. They just wanted to leave. The search was called off. No further evidence was ever found. Jacob's case was quietly closed. Official cause of death, undetermined. But in Tennessee, among the locals, the story lives on. They say if you hike deep enough into the dark valley and stop by the ledge where the boots once stood, you might hear something moving just beyond the tree line. Not an animal, not a man. Something else. Something that doesn't like to be seen, but never forgets a trespasser. What happened next was never made public. A retired ranger named Tom Calloway came forward with a story he'd buried for years. He claimed that back in 1997, long before Jacob Smith vanished, another hiker went missing in the exact same area. But there was no news coverage, no search party. Just a quiet operation involving park officials and a handful of people from out of town. People in black suits, no badges, no names. Tom said they found a hidden tunnel beneath the forest floor. Man-made but ancient, too old for anyone to explain. Inside were symbols carved into the walls, the same ones found around Jacob's boots. At the deepest point was a pit, and from within it came sounds, voices that mimicked the living, cries for help that were never real. They sealed the tunnel, and they never spoke of it again. So when Jacob disappeared, Tom knew exactly where to look. But when he returned, the tunnel was gone. The ground had shifted. Trees had regrown unnaturally fast. It was as if the forest had healed itself, or had been forced to. Tom's warning to everyone: this forest takes what it wants, and sometimes it gives just enough back to keep us coming closer. Years later, hikers still report strange sightings, shadowy figures standing motionless among the trees, whispering in voices that sound like loved ones, cold winds with no source, and always the feeling that they're not alone. Some say the forest isn't haunted, it's alive, and Jacob Smith, he may not have been the first, he definitely won't be the last. So now I ask you, what do you think happened to Jacob Smith? Was it a tragic accident buried under legend? Or did he uncover something but older than we can imagine? Drop your theories in the comments. And if you've ever hiked the Smoky Mountains and felt something watching you, we want to hear your story. Make sure to subscribe for more real stories darker than fiction. Hit that bell icon because next time, we're heading into a place where no one's made it out to tell the tale. Stay aware, stay curious, and remember, some forests don't just grow trees, they grow secrets.